somewhere under your feet, or under a hillside you have driven past 100 times, there is a black seam of rock that used to be a forest. Not a fossil of a forest. The forest itself, flattened, cooked, and kept. We named an entire chapter of Earth's history after that black rock. The Carboniferous, from the Latin for coal-bearing, a period that ran about 60 million years, from roughly 359 million years ago to 299 million. It is a strange thing to name a span of deep time after a fuel. But the name is honest. Most of the coal our species has ever burned was made in this one stretch of the past and in the period that followed it. To understand why, you have to stand in that world, and it would not welcome you. The continents were in the wrong places, the air had the wrong chemistry, and the trees were not, in any sense you would recognize, trees. Start with the map. Through the Carboniferous, the continents were converging into the supercontinent we call Pangaea, closing around an ocean called the Paleotethys, with a single enormous ocean, Panthalassa, beyond. Where those continents ground into each other, they threw up a mountain chain geologists call the Central Pangaean Mountains. Their eroded roots still run more than 10,000 kilometers, from the Gulf of Mexico to Turkey. Those mountains did something crucial. They pulled moist air off the Paleotethys Ocean and wrung it out as rain. In the lowlands beside them, along the equator, that rain made a permanently wet, permanently warm world. And these were not ordinary lowlands. They were subsiding, sinking, slowly and continuously, as the crust flexed under the weight of the growing mountains. A basin that keeps sinking is a basin that can keep filling. Fill it with warm rain, and the result is swamp, waterlogged ground, standing black water, and a thick sodden layer of dead plant matter that never dries out. Geologists call that layer a peat mire. It is the raw material of everything that follows. Peat forms where dead plants pile up faster than they break down, in water so stagnant it holds almost no oxygen. Bury that peat deep enough, for long enough, press it and warm it, and it becomes coal. That is the recipe, and it still works. Peat is forming today in bogs and mires all over the world. So the real question of this episode is not how coal forms, it is why this one period made so much of it. Because the Carboniferous did not merely make coal, it made the overwhelming majority of it, enough to fuel an industrial revolution and most of the 20th century, laid down in a single window of deep time. The people who first mapped these rocks had no idea any of that was coming. In 1822, two geologists, William Conybeare and William Phillips, gathered Britain's coal-bearing layers into one formal unit and gave it the name. Carboniferous was the first of the modern system names, the first time a slice of Earth's history was formally defined and labeled the way we still do it. The word came from the rock, and the rock came from a forest. In North America, the same interval is usually split in two. The earlier Mississippian, named in 1870 for limestones of the upper Mississippi Valley, and the later Pennsylvanian, named in 1888 for Pennsylvania's coal-rich strata. That split matters, because the coal is concentrated in the second half. The Great Swamp Forests belong to the Pennsylvanian, the world of roughly 320 to 300 million years ago. So set yourself down there. Equatorial, humid to the point of oppression, flat, waterlogged ground running to the horizon, cut by river channels several kilometers wide, feeding a maze of smaller channels, lakes, and mires. There is no grass. There are no flowers. Nothing anywhere on Earth has evolved a flower yet. There are no birds. Nothing sings. The sound of this forest is water, wind through fronds and insects. And above that understory stand the things that made the coal, trunks rising 40, sometimes 50 meters, straight up, with almost no branches until the very top. They looked like trees. They grew like trees. They were not trees. And the difference between them and an oak is the difference between a world that makes coal and a world that does not. The most famous of them is called Lepidodendron. The name comes from the Greek for scale and tree, scale, tree, because its bark was covered in diamond-shaped cushions, the bases of leaves that had already fallen away. Some reached 50 meters tall, with trunks more than a meter across, and as much as 2 meters at the base. By any ordinary measure, a forest giant. But Lepidodendron was not a relative of the oak or the pine. It was a lycophyte, and its closest living relatives are quillworts, unassuming little plants you could hold in one hand. That is not a small correction. It means the tallest life on Earth had been improvised out of a lineage with no history of building anything tall, and it shows in how the thing was put together. A modern tree thickens by growing new wood in a ring under the bark year after year in both directions, new wood inward, new conducting tissue outward. That is why an oak trunk is mostly wood. Lepidodendron's growth layer worked in one direction only. It produced wood inward and nothing outward, so its trunk contained comparatively little wood at all. Most of a mature stem was soft inner tissue, which raises an obvious problem. If the inside is soft, what holds 50 meters of plant upright against the wind? The answer is the bark. These giants were supported not by their core, but by their rind. Think of a drinking straw versus a solid rod. A hollow tube of stiff material resists bending remarkably well for its weight. Lepidodendron built itself as a tube of tough bark filled with soft tissue, cheap, fast, and tall. Cheap and fast matter here. That outer bark is thick, tough, and rich in the polymer that makes plant material hard to break down, and every one of these trunks would eventually fall into black, oxygen-poor water. They did not grow the way our trees grow either. There is no sign of seasonal rhythm in their tissue, no growth rings from a winter, no dormant buds waiting out a cold season. This world barely had seasons. Their leaves were needle-like, spiraling densely around young shoots, each with a single vein. As branches aged, the needles dropped, leaving behind those diamond cushions a trunk tattooed with the record of its own growth. Instead of endless spreading limbs, they branched by forking, one stem splitting into two, again and again, up into a crown that ended in cones somewhat like a spruce's. Below ground, they were just as strange, spreading horizontal branching structures studded with rootlets through the waterlogged soil, an anchoring system quite unlike a modern tree's tapering roots. Lepidodendron was not alone. The swamps held related giants, tree ferns, horsetail relatives, and seed ferns, an entire architecture of green improvisation, most of it with no living equivalent at all. And here is the thing about a forest of soft-cored, bark-armored giants growing in permanently flooded ground. It is a machine for delivering enormous quantities of tough plant material into water where almost nothing can breathe. Every trunk that fell did not stand and dry and slowly crumble the way a fallen tree does in a modern wood. It went under, into water, into mud, into the dark. Multiply that by millions of years, across floodplains the size of countries, in basins that were quietly sinking the whole time, and you get peat layers piling up faster than the world can dispose of them. We can be precise about how those layers stack, because they repeat. Drill through Pennsylvania rock in Illinois, or Yorkshire, or the Donetsk Basin, and you find the same sequence over and over. Mudstone, coal, limestone, black shale, then mudstone again. Geologists call one of those repeats a cyclothem, and it is a fossilized record of the sea coming in and going out again. Individual cyclothems are usually less than 10 meters thick, but sequences of them can run for hundreds or thousands of meters containing tens or hundreds of individual cycles. The same story, told again and again. What drives that rhythm is happening 10,000 kilometers away, at the South Pole. Because while the equator steamed, the southern supercontinent, Gondwana, was under ice. This was the late Paleozoic Ice Age, and its ice sheets grew and shrank on a cycle of roughly 100,000 years, a rhythm set by slow, regular wobbles in Earth's orbit around the sun. Walk water up as ice at the pole, and global sea level falls. Melt it, and sea level rises. On a continental shelf as flat as a table, a small change in sea level moves the coastline enormous distances. So the swamps advanced and drowned, Each advance laid down peat. Each drowning buried it under marine mud and limestone, sealing it away from the air and preserving it. Burial is the whole trick. Peat exposed to air oxidizes and disappears. Peat sealed under sediment, then pressed and warmed for 100 million years, becomes something you can set on fire. Now the air itself. Oxygen in the Carboniferous atmosphere was not simply high all the way through, as was once believed. It rose from low levels early in the period to highs of about 25 to 30%. Today's air is close to 21% oxygen. At the Carboniferous peak, roughly one molecule in 3 or 4 was oxygen. That is not a trivial difference. It changes what a forest does when lightning hits it and what an insect can be. Which brings us to the animal everyone remembers. Its name is Meganeura, large vein, and it is the reason the Carboniferous lives in the popular imagination as the age of monstrous insects. It was not a dragonfly. It belonged to an extinct group called griffinflies, close to the ancestry of dragonflies and damselflies, but off on its own branch, and gone for nearly 300 million years. The numbers are genuinely startling. A single wing could reach 32 centimeters. Wingspan estimates run to between about 65 and 75 centimeters, comparable to a large bird of prey. Mass estimates vary a great deal, from under 20 grams to 150, which tells you how incomplete the fossils are. But even the low end makes it one of the largest flying insects ever known. It was found in 1880 in the coal measures at Commentry in France, in rock, from the very end of the Carboniferous, dug up, like so much of this story, by people who were mining the forest for fuel. The paleontologist Charles Brongniart described it in 1884, first placing it in another genus, and gave it a genus of its own the year after. The species name honors Stéphane Moni, the recently deceased manager of the Commentry mines. It was a predator. Like modern dragonflies, it had large compound eyes meeting along the midline, and its legs carried heavy spines, a basket for catching other insects in the air. But it did not fly like a dragonfly. Its size and wing structure mean it could not have made the abrupt, darting direction changes a modern dragonfly makes. It was a cruiser, not an acrobat. And it may have spent much of its time simply sitting still. Insects do not pump oxygen the way we do. They let it seep inward through a network of fine tubes, and at that size, seepage struggles. So, the standard explanation writes itself: more oxygen in the air, easier seepage, bigger possible insects. It is a tidy story. It is endlessly repeated, and the evidence for it is not as clean as you would like, because giant griffinflies were still flying in the late Permian after oxygen levels had fallen. If high oxygen were the whole explanation, they should have vanished with it. They did not. Another possibility is simpler. For most of the Carboniferous, nothing else was hunting in the air. No birds, no bats, no pterosaurs. An insect could grow large because nothing above it was waiting. And the disappearance of the giants may track the arrival of flying vertebrates the moment the sky stopped being an insect's private property. That is a hypothesis, not a verdict. Deep time rarely offers verdicts. Now, to the real mystery of this period, the one hiding in its name. Why did so much plant matter survive to become coal here, and so much less in the 400 million years since? To answer that, you need to know what a tree is made of, and what it takes to take one apart. The hard part is a polymer called lignin. Lignin was first described in 1813 by the Swiss botanist Augustin Paramus de Candolle, who called it lignine, from the Latin for wood. He noted it was fibrous, tasteless, and would not dissolve in water. It is one of the most abundant organic polymers on the planet, exceeded only by cellulose and chitin. It makes up something like 20 to 35% of the dry mass of wood. Its job is structural. It fills the spaces in the cell wall, cross-links the other components, and, being water repellent, it lets a plant's plumbing carry water without the pipe soaking through. It is also, from the point of view of anything trying to eat a tree, a nightmare, an irregular, heavily cross-linked molecule with no neat repeating seam to attack. Breaking it takes specialized chemistry. Today, that chemistry exists. Certain fungi, white rot fungi among the Basidiomycetes, carry enzymes that dismantle lignin. It is why a fallen log in a modern forest turns soft, then crumbly, then gone. So, here is the classic explanation for Carboniferous coal, and it is a beautiful one. Trees invented lignin. For a long stretch, nothing had evolved the ability to break it down. Dead wood simply accumulated. This is the delayed fungal evolution hypothesis, and genetic work on those lignin-eating fungi supports a version of it, suggesting the relevant enzymes appeared around the Permian after the Great Coal-forming interval. It is a satisfying story, an ecological gap in the world's recycling system, lasting tens of millions of years and filled with wood. But it has problems, and honest science says so out loud. First problem. Large coal deposits also formed much later, in the Mesozoic and Cenozoic, long after lignin-digesting fungi were well established. If missing fungi were the whole answer, that later coal should not exist. Second problem. Some evidence suggests fungal breakdown of lignin may already have evolved by the end of the Devonian, before the Carboniferous even began, even if the specific enzymes of those particular fungi had not. So, there is a second explanation, less romantic, but harder to argue with. It says, look at where the continents were, and what the ground was doing. A wide band of continents sitting in the wet equatorial zone. Enormous plant productivity, and low-lying, waterlogged basins that kept subsiding so peat could keep piling up and being buried instead of eroding away. Each of those conditions exists somewhere today. What made the Carboniferous singular is that all of them lined up at once, in the same places, for tens of millions of years. The debate between those explanations is genuinely unresolved. You will find confident answers in older books and in a great many videos. The current position is more careful and more interesting, probably both, in proportions we are still arguing about. What is not in doubt is the result. And we can hold a piece of it because occasionally the swamp preserved itself perfectly in objects called coal balls. A coal ball is a lump of peat that got flooded with calcite before it could turn into coal. The minerals seeped in and cast the plant tissue in stone, cell by cell, instead of crushing it flat. Cut one open, polish it, and you can look at 300 million-year-old cells. Not impressions of them. The structures themselves, mineralized in place, the anatomy of a forest that has otherwise been reduced to fuel. They were first described scientifically in 1855 by Joseph Dalton Hooker and Edward William Binney from coal seams in Yorkshire and Lancashire. Nearly 40 years later, similar objects turned up in the coal of Iowa. Almost everything we know in fine detail about these plants, how their tissues were arranged, how their cones worked, comes from lumps of rock that miners were digging past on their way to something they could burn. Now the ending. Around 305 million years ago, the coal forests of the tropical belt across what is now Europe and North America came apart. Geologists call it the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. It is classed as a minor extinction event, which rather undersells what it did to the land. The climate turned cooler and drier. The Earth ticked into a short, intense glacial interval. Sea level dropped by something like 100 meters, and ice covered much of Gondwana. Rainforest needs constant rain. Take that away and the forest does not retreat evenly, it breaks into patches. Wet valleys hold on, the ground between them dries out and turns hostile. The collapse happened in steps, not in a single stroke. First, opportunistic ferns became more common. Then, quite abruptly, the dominant scale trees crashed and tree fern-dominated ecosystems took their place. You can see it in the rivers too. Studies of the rock record show meandering channels, large woody debris and log jams all falling away sharply at the same boundary, a landscape losing the trees that had been shaping it. And then, in the latest part of that interval, the rainforests simply stop appearing in the fossil record of the region. Not thinned. Gone. Something important happens next, and it happens to us. Before the collapse, the same vertebrate species ranged widely across the tropical belt. Afterwards, each surviving patch of forest went its own way. Fragment of habitat, and the first effect is brutal. Most life dies quickly for lack of resources. Then the survivors, locked in their pockets, adapt to what is left and diversify along separate paths. The amphibians took this badly. Their ancestors' whole strategy assumed water, skin that must stay wet, eggs that must be laid in a pond. A drying world removes both requirements at once. But another group did fine. The amniotes, the ancestors of reptiles, birds, and mammals, lay eggs with a membrane that holds water in while still letting the embryo breathe. That egg is a private pond you can carry. They had also re-evolved tougher, more keratinized scales, trading the amphibian's ability to breathe through wet skin for the ability to hold water in. In a drying world, that trade pays. So, the crisis that killed the coal forests handed the future to the animals that could leave the water behind, and among those animals were the ancestors of every mammal, including you. You can visit the moment. On the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, the sea cliffs at Joggins expose these rocks in cross-section, and the tides keep cutting them open. It is a World Heritage Site. Charles Lyell, the geologist who taught the 19th century to think in deep time, found fossil skeletons embedded in those crumbling cliffs in 1852. 7 years later, his colleague William Dawson found something remarkable there, Hylonomus lyelli, the oldest known ancestor of reptiles, preserved inside a fossil tree stump. Hundreds more skeletons have come out of those cliffs since, including the oldest known synapsid, the branch of the family tree that eventually leads to mammals. To us. And the collapse was not global. In the region geologists call Cathasia, roughly, what is now China, Carboniferous-style rainforests, carried on for another 50 million years, until the end of the Permian, which is a useful reminder about extinction stories. They are almost never total, and they are almost never simultaneous. Somewhere, the old world usually keeps going for a while. There is one more number worth sitting with. Through the Carboniferous, all that buried plant matter was carbon being taken out of the atmosphere and locked into the ground. Atmospheric carbon dioxide fell to among the lowest levels in Earth's entire history during the Pennsylvanian and early Permian. The forests did that. They buried their own greenhouse and cooled their own world. 300 million years later, a species evolved that found the seams, dug them out, and set them alight, and in about 2 centuries began returning that buried carbon to the air. That is not immoral, and this is not that kind of film. It is simply the shape of the story, a forest that could not rot, a planet that filed it away, and a species that opened the drawer. So, the next time you pass a coal seam in a road cutting, look at it properly. That black band is a rainforest. It stood in warm rain, in air you could not have breathed comfortably, under insects the size of hawks. It fell into water that could not rot it, and it waited, through the ice, through the collapse, through the whole rise and fall of the dinosaurs, for someone to come along and wonder what it used to be.